I stepped off the gangway onto the Petrov's deck and immediately knew something was off. Not off exactly, more like purposely hidden. The ship looked like a research vessel, smelled like one too, all diesel fumes and salt spray. But the crew moved with military precision that didn't match their civilian coveralls. "Dr. Jenkins?" A woman approached with her hand extended, saving me from staring too obviously at the armed guards pretending to be deckhands. "Mildred Padilla, Marine Biology. You must be our deep-sea expert." I shook her hand, feeling the firm grip and watching her eyes sweep the deck behind me. "Anthony. And yeah, that's me, though I'm starting to wonder what exactly I'm an expert for." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Join the club. My briefing packet was basically bring diving gear and ask no questions." The NDA I'd signed back in Seattle had been 37 pages long. 37 pages to essentially say shut up forever or face consequences that weren't specified but sounded expensive and possibly illegal. I'd signed it anyway because my bank account was looking pretty sad and the pay was too good to pass up. "Dr. Jenkins?" Another voice, softer. I turned to see a pale woman with strawberry blonde hair tucked behind her ears. She looked nervous, which somehow made me feel better about my own unease. "I'm Fern Fox, Geological Survey Specialist." "Nice to meet you." I was about to ask what kind of geological work we'd be doing in the middle of the ocean when she started speaking rapid Russian to a passing crew member. Not just speaking it, she sounded native. Her accent, when she'd introduced herself, had been pure American, maybe East Coast. Mildred caught my expression. "Interesting team they've put together." Before I could respond, heavy footsteps came up from behind. "Dr. Jenkins, welcome aboard the Petrov." I turned to face Captain Dalton Campbell, whose handshake could probably crack walnuts. He had the worn look of someone who'd spent decades battling the ocean to a draw, with steel gray eyes that seemed to record everything they saw. "Captain, hell of a ship you've got here. She served us well." His gaze drifted past my shoulder toward the harbor. "I trust your accommodations in Vladivostok were satisfactory." "The hotel was fine, though I have to admit I'm curious about our destination. The briefing materials were a bit vague." Campbell's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Yes, well, operational security requires certain precautions. You'll receive a full briefing once we reach international waters." There it was again, operational security, not research protocols or scientific methodology. Operational security was military talk. "Speaking of which," Campbell continued, "we should get you settled and conduct the mandatory safety briefing. We'll be departing within the hour." He led us through the ship, and I tried not to stare at the equipment. The Petrov was supposedly a research vessel operated by Russia's Ministry of Natural Resources and Ecology. But the technology I caught sight of through open doorways looked more advanced than anything I'd seen on university expeditions. Sealed chambers with warning labels in multiple languages, monitoring stations with screens showing data streams I didn't recognize. And was that radiation detection equipment? "Impressive setup," I said, trying to sound casual. "The ministry spares no expense for important research," Campbell replied without looking back. We passed a cargo hold where several crew members were checking sealed containers. They stopped talking when they saw us, which seemed strange. Scientists usually loved showing off their equipment to other scientists. Campbell took us to our quarters, small but comfortable cabins, with portholes overlooking the harbor. Mine was next to Mildred's, with Fern across the narrow hallway. As we gathered in the common area for the safety briefing, I noticed how the three of us kept looking at each other like we were all thinking the same thing, but afraid to say it. Campbell went through standard maritime safety procedures with military precision. Emergency stations, life jacket locations, evacuation protocols. Then he mentioned something that made my stomach drop. We'll have a special consultant joining us once we reach international waters. He'll be providing additional guidance for the more specialized aspects of our mission. What kind of specialized aspects? Mildred asked. Campbell's eyes went flat. That will be covered in tomorrow's briefing. Fern moved in her seat, and I caught her checking her watch. She'd been doing that a lot since I'd arrived, like she was on some kind of schedule. Any other questions? Campbell asked. I had about 50, but his tone suggested this wasn't the time. When do we find out exactly where we're going? Tomorrow morning, Dr. Jenkins. For now, I suggest you get some rest. We have a long journey ahead. As the briefing broke up, I hung around near the windows watching the sun go down over Vladivostok. The harbor was busy with commercial traffic, but I spotted a smaller boat keeping pace with us as we got ready to leave. Probably just coincidence. Second thoughts? Mildred appeared beside me. Third and fourth thoughts, actually. I watched the crew cast off the mooring lines with practiced efficiency. You ever been on a research mission where they wouldn't tell you what you were researching? Once. Turned out they were studying the effects of industrial runoff on coral reefs, but the company funding it didn't want their name attached until they knew the results. She paused. This feels different, though. Different how? More secretive. And did you notice the crew? They're not acting like civilian researchers. I had noticed. The way they moved, how they used hand signals when they thought we weren't watching, how they all looked to Campbell like he was running a military operation instead of leading a research trip. The Petrov's engines rumbled to life, and I felt the deck shake beneath my feet. We were committed now, whatever this was. Well, I said, watching the lights of Vladivostok begin to recede. I guess we'll find out tomorrow what we've gotten ourselves into. Mildred nodded, but she looked unhappy about something behind me. I turned to see Fern talking intently with one of the crew members, speaking Russian again. When she noticed us watching, she quickly ended the conversation and headed toward her cabin. Yeah, Mildred said quietly. I guess we will. As the ship moved into open water, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing more than just territorial boundaries. The locked cargo containers, the military-precise crew, the mysterious consultant waiting for us in international waters. None of it pointed to routine marine research. I went to my cabin and tried to sleep, but the questions wouldn't stop spinning. What kind of research needed this much secrecy? What was inside those locked containers? And why did I get the clear sense that Captain Campbell was more worried about our destination than excited about it? Outside my porthole, the ocean stretched endlessly into darkness, hiding whatever it knew. I woke up to someone moving around in the hallway outside my cabin. Nothing strange about that on a ship, except it was 3 a.m, and whoever it was tried way too hard to stay quiet. I listened for a few minutes, then gave up on sleep and decided to grab some coffee from the galley. The Petrov never really slept anyway. There was always someone on watch, always the buzz of engines and electronics keeping us moving through the darkness. The hallway was empty when I stepped out, but I could see light coming from under Mildred's door. I was about to knock when I heard the soft click of a camera shutter. Then another, and another. That was weird. What was she photographing in her cabin at 3 a.m? I walked down to the galley in my socks, trying to piece together what I'd heard. The coffee maker was one of those industrial things that could probably fuel a small aircraft, and I was waiting for it to finish when I heard footsteps on the deck above. Purposeful this time, not trying to hide. 20 minutes later, I was walking back to my cabin with a mug of coffee that could strip paint when I saw Mildred slip out of her room and disappear toward the equipment bays. She was carrying what looked like a waterproof case. Now I was definitely curious. I followed at a distance, staying hidden between the overhead lights. The equipment bays were supposed to be off-limits to passengers without an escort, but Mildred moved through them like she knew exactly where she was going. She stopped at one of the sealed chambers I'd noticed on our first day, the one with warning labels in multiple languages. While I watched from behind a support beam, she pulled out a small camera and started taking pictures of everything. The warning labels, the control panels, even the serial numbers on equipment I couldn't recognize. Find something interesting? She whipped around so quickly she almost let the camera slip from her hands. Seeing it was me, her shoulders dropped as the tension left her body. Jesus, Anthony, you scared the hell out of me. Sorry, couldn't sleep. I stepped out from behind the beam. Mind if I ask what you're documenting? For a second, she looked like she was going to lie. Then something in her expression changed, like she was making a decision. You really want to know? I really want to know. She looked around to make sure we were alone, then pulled out her phone. The screen showed an encrypted messaging app I didn't recognize. I'm not just here for marine biology research, she said quietly. I work with an environmental watchdog group. We've been tracking illegal deep-sea mining operations in international waters. And you think that's what this is? Look around, Anthony. Half this equipment isn't for biological research. Those sealed chambers? That's mineral processing gear. The radiation detectors? You don't need those for studying fish. I thought about the crew's military precision, the vague briefing materials, the mysterious consultant we were supposed to meet. So you think the Russians are mining the ocean floor illegally? I think someone is. And I think our job is to provide scientific cover for whatever they're really doing down there. She held up her phone screen. Dozens of photos, all uploaded to encrypted files with timestamps and GPS coordinates. My organization has been investigating this for 2 years. Ships disappearing from satellite tracking, unusual seismic activity in areas where no mining should be happening, environmental damage that doesn't match any known industrial processes. Damage like what? Dead zones, massive areas where nothing lives anymore. And the weird part is they're perfectly circular. Nature doesn't make perfect circles, Anthony. A cold feeling crept up my back that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. How big are these dead zones? The largest one we've detected is over 1 kilometer across, right in the middle of the Mariana Trench. I stared at her. That's where we're going, isn't it? I think so. The course corrections we've been making all point to the same general area. Before I could respond, we heard footsteps coming our way. Mildred quickly stuffed her phone and camera into her pockets, and we both tried to look casual as one of the crew members appeared around the corner. He said something in Russian, his tone polite but firm. Mildred answered back in the same language, and after a brief exchange, he nodded and walked away. What did he say? That passengers aren't supposed to be in this area without escort. I told him we got lost looking for the bathroom. We made our way back toward the passenger quarters, but I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd told me. Dead zones in perfect circles, ships vanishing without a trace, and we were heading straight for the biggest anomaly they'd found. Mildred, if you're right about this, what exactly do you think we're going to find down there? She stayed quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but whatever it is, I don't think it's just mining equipment. The next day dragged by. I tried to focus on the technical specs for our deep sea gear, but my mind kept drifting back to Mildred's photos and those dead zones she'd mentioned. Fern holed up in her cabin most of the day, and when she showed up for meals, she seemed more on edge each time. At lunch, I caught her glued to her phone. Not just scrolling. She was typing out long messages in what looked like Cyrillic script. Everything okay, Fern? She looked up like I'd surprised her, Oh, yes. Just checking in with my department. They want regular updates on our progress. We haven't made any progress yet. We're still traveling. Yes, well, they're very thorough about documentation. Mildred looked at me from across the table. She'd seen how Fern was acting too. That evening, Captain Campbell told us we'd reach our destination by morning and start operations right away. He also said our special consultant would be eating dinner with us. I thought he was meeting us in international waters, I said. Change of plans. He came aboard this afternoon while you were reviewing equipment specs. I made a face. I didn't see any other boats. Campbell's expression didn't change. He has his own way of getting around. The dining area felt different that night, colder somehow, even though the ship's heating system worked fine. The three of us sat at our usual table, picking at our food and making awkward conversation about tomorrow's dive prep. Then he appeared. I don't know how else to describe it. One moment the dining area held just the three of us and a couple of crew members, and the next moment there was a fourth person sitting at the table next to ours, not walking in, not coming from another part of the room, just suddenly there, like he'd appeared out of thin air. He was huge, easily 6'2", and built like he could bench press a small car. But it was his skin that made my stomach drop. Pale didn't begin to cover it. He looked almost see-through, like you could make out the veins underneath if you stared too long. His hair was so blonde it was nearly white, and his eyes caught the overhead lights, giving them an animal-like gleam. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room despite speaking at normal volume. "I'm J. Bravo. I'll be consulting on your mission." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Fern went completely rigid in her chair. Mildred stopped eating mid-bite. Even the crew members found reasons to be somewhere else. Jay stood and walked toward our table with movements that were too smooth, too graceful for someone his size. When he smiled, I felt every instinct I had screaming at me to run. "Dr. Jenkins, I presume? I've heard excellent things about your deep-sea expertise." I forced myself to stand and shake his hand. His skin was freezing and felt wrong somehow, like touching something that was pretending to be human. "Nice to meet you. What kind of consulting do you do?" "I ensure everyone's safety during the descent." His smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. The deep ocean can be very dangerous for those who aren't properly prepared. Prepared how? Oh, you'll see tomorrow. The depths hold such unique opportunities for those brave enough to explore them. The way he said opportunities made my skin crawl. Mildred found her voice. "What kind of opportunities?" Jay turned that disturbing stare on her. "The kind that change your perspective on humanity's place in the world, Dr. Padilla. I think you'll find tomorrow's expedition quite enlightening." Fern let out a quiet noise that sounded almost like a whimper. "Are you all right, Dr. Fox?" Jay's attention shifted to her, and she seemed to shrink in her chair. "You look pale. Perhaps you should get some rest before tomorrow's dive." "I'm fine," she whispered. "Of course you are." Jay's smile became predatory. "We're all going to have such an interesting time together." He looked around the table, his eyes stopping on each of us like he was memorizing our faces. "Well, I should let you finish your dinner. Big day tomorrow. We'll be reaching depths that very few humans have ever experienced." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Dr. Jenkins, I'd recommend getting a good night's sleep. You'll want to be well rested for what we're going to show you." Then he was gone. Not walking away, just gone, like he'd never been there at all. The three of us sat quietly for several minutes. Finally, Mildred spoke up. "What the hell was that?" I don't know, I said, but I was lying. Some primitive part of my brain knew exactly what that was. It was a predator, and we were prey. Fern jumped up. I need to make a phone call. She practically ran from the dining area. Mildred and I looked at each other across the table. Anthony, she said quietly, I don't think we're here to study mining operations. No, I agreed, watching the empty space where Jay had been standing. I don't think we are either. Outside the dining room windows, the ocean stretched endlessly into darkness. But for the first time since we'd left port, I had the unsettling feeling that something in that darkness was looking back. The sun was just breaking the horizon when Captain Campbell's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing we'd reached our destination. I'd been awake for hours anyway, staring out my porthole at the endless Pacific, trying to shake the memory of Jay's cold handshake and those mirror-like eyes. All scientific personnel to the dive preparation bay, Campbell's voice continued. We begin descent operations in 30 minutes. I grabbed my gear and headed topside, where the morning air hit me hard. The ocean was dead calm, which should have been good news, but somehow wasn't. Perfect conditions for a dive, but the water looked wrong, too dark, like it was eating light instead of bouncing it back. Mildred was already at the dive bay, fussing with her camera equipment. Her movements looked a little too careful. Sleep well? She asked without looking up. Not really. You? Like a baby. But her hands were shaking slightly as she adjusted her underwater housing. Ready to see what all the secrecy's been about? The submersible Nereid sat in its launch cradle like a metal egg, all curves and reinforced viewports. I'd worked with similar deep-sea vehicles before, but this one had modifications I didn't recognize. Extra sensor arrays, reinforced hull plating, and what looked like emergency ascent rockets that could probably launch us to the surface. In under a minute. Fern showed up beside us, her face pale as her strawberry blonde hair. She was carrying a case of equipment that definitely wasn't standard geological survey gear. What's in the case? I asked. Seismic sensors, she said quickly, for measuring tectonic activity. I'd seen seismic sensors before. These looked more like the energy detection equipment they used at particle accelerators, but I didn't push it. We were all keeping secrets at this point. Campbell walked over with his usual heavy footsteps, followed by 2 crew members who started running final systems checks on the Nereid. Weather conditions are optimal, he announced. Descent will start at 8 a.m. What exactly are we descending to investigate? Mildred asked. Campbell's face went blank. Geological weird stuff that the Russians found in their old surveys. You'll get the exact coordinates once you're in the water. What kind of anomalies? The kind that require expert analysis. Campbell turned to me. Dr. Jenkins, you'll be primary pilot. Dr. Padilla, you're responsible for biological documentation. Dr. Fox will handle geological assessment. I noticed he didn't mention what we were supposed to do if we actually found something. As we got our gear ready in the dive prep chamber, I saw Jay through the small window. He stood completely still on the observation deck against the morning sky. Even from way over here, his pale figure looked off somehow, like a photo that had been left in the sun too long. He's watching us, Fern whispered. Yeah, I noticed. I finished checking my dive suit seals. Any idea what his deal is? Fern shook her head, but her hands were shaking as she buckled her gear. The Nereid's inside was tight but well designed, with 3 seats arranged around a central control panel. I took the pilot spot while Mildred and Fern buckled themselves in on either side. The windows gave us a wide view of the ocean surface, which was starting to look less calm and more like a huge cover hiding something we probably shouldn't mess with. Nereid, this is Petrov Control. Campbell's voice came through the comm system, You are cleared for descent. Target depth is 11,000 meters. 11,000 meters. That was deeper than Mount Everest was tall, down in the Hadal zone where the pressure could crush a human body in milliseconds. I'd been that deep before, but never with this much worry sitting in my stomach. Copy. Petrov control. Beginning descent. I triggered the ballast release, and we started dropping into the blue. For the first few hundred meters, everything seemed normal. Sunlight filtered down through the water. The occasional fish darted past our lights. Mildred snapped photos through her viewport, making enthusiastic comments about the marine life that sounded forced even to my ears. At 2,000 meters, we reached the twilight zone, where the last traces of sunlight vanished and our external floods became the only light. The water turned black as ink, and our sonar started painting pictures of the trench walls pressing in around us. Fascinating bioluminescence patterns, Mildred said, but her voice was tight. I'm getting some great documentation. At 5,000 meters, Fern started checking her instruments over and over again. The energy detection equipment, because that's definitely what it was, began showing faint readings that made her look unhappy. Everything okay back there? I asked. Just background radiation. Probably natural. At 8,000 meters, the trench walls showed up on our sonar as huge cliff faces dropping away into black emptiness. We were in the deepest part of the ocean now, farther from the surface than most people would ever travel from sea level. Nereid, this is Petrov control. You should be approaching the target area. I double-checked our coordinates against the navigation system. We were floating directly above the deepest part of the Mariana Trench, in a region most maps still marked as unexplored. Copy. Petrov control. Depth is 10,500 meters and descending. That's when our sonar picked it up. What the hell is that? Mildred leaned forward, staring at the sonar display. The screen displayed a huge, circular hole in the ocean floor, perfectly round and over a kilometer across. Not a crater or a dip. A hole, like something had cut a perfect circle out of the seafloor and taken everything inside it. That's impossible, I said. Natural geological formations don't make perfect circles. Fern stared at her energy detection equipment, watching readings that made absolutely no sense. The energy emissions are getting stronger, much stronger. What kind of energy emissions? She looked up at me, and I saw real fear in her eyes. The kind that shouldn't exist at the bottom of the ocean. I turned on the comm system. Petrov control. We're detecting a large circular anomaly in the seafloor. Requesting guidance. Campbell's response came back immediately. Proceed with investigation, Nereid. Go down to the anomaly and conduct close-range survey. Sir, the energy readings suggest. Proceed with investigation. I looked at Mildred and Fern. Both of them stared at the sonar display, watching the perfect circle expand as we drew closer. Fern, I said quietly, what aren't you telling us? She stayed silent for a long moment, her fingers clutching her equipment case. Finally, she spoke. Russian deep-sea surveys have been detecting intermittent energy bursts from this location for over 2 years. Massive energy signatures that don't match any known geological or biological processes. And the government believes something artificial is down there, something that's been sending signals. My stomach dropped. Signals to what? We don't know, but they're not random. They're patterned, structured. Like communication. I stared at the sonar display, watching the circular void expand as we dropped toward it. You're telling me we're investigating first contact? I'm telling you that's what they think we might be investigating. Suddenly, Jay's presence on the mission made terrifying sense. He wasn't here to make sure we stayed safe during a routine research dive. He was here because whatever was down there might not be completely unknown to certain people. "Depth 11,000 meters, I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. "Approaching the anomaly." Through the viewports, we could see the edge of the circular void getting closer. The seafloor just stopped. Past the edge was nothing but dark water dropping into depths our lights couldn't reach. Fern's energy detection equipment was going wild now, showing readings that jumped and flashed in patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat. "It knows we're here," she whispered. "What knows we're here?" She looked up at me, eyes huge with fear. "Whatever's been sending the signals. The energy patterns just changed. They're responding to our presence." I felt the submersible shake a bit, caught by some current I couldn't place. We were being pulled toward the center of the void, dragged by forces that had nothing to do with normal ocean currents. "Nereid, report status." Campbell's voice crackled through the comm. I looked at Mildred and Fern, both staring into the black void below us. Whatever was down there had been waiting, and now we were about to find out what humanity's first contact with the unknown actually looked like. "Petrov Control," I said. "We're beginning descent into the anomaly." The depth gauge hit 11,500 meters and kept climbing as we dropped into the void. I'd never seen readings like this. The ocean floor was supposed to be around 11,000 meters here, but we were falling through empty water with no bottom in sight. "This is impossible," I muttered, watching the numbers scroll past 12,000 meters. We should have hit the seafloor by now. Fern's energy detection equipment was going crazy, the displays showing patterns that moved and changed like something alive. The readings are off the charts. Whatever's down here is creating huge electromagnetic fields. Mildred had her camera pressed against the viewport, trying to get a shot of something in the darkness below. "Anthony, look at this. Tell me you're seeing this too." I leaned over to look through her viewport. At first, I saw nothing but black water lit up by our floods. Then the lights caught something moving in the distance. Streaks of blue-green bioluminescence flowing in perfect geometric patterns. What the hell? I adjusted our external lighting to get a better view. The glowing patterns weren't random. They moved together in organized formations, spiraling and weaving through the water like some kind of massive light show. But the scale was all wrong. For the patterns to be visible at this distance, whatever was creating them had to be huge. "It's beautiful," Mildred whispered, still taking photos. "I've never seen bioluminescence organize itself like this." "That's because it's not organizing itself," Fern said, her voice tight with fear. "Something's controlling it." The submersible shook as we hit 13,000 meters. The hull groaned loudly and I felt my ears pop even with the pressurized cabin. We were deeper than any human had ever gone, in water that shouldn't exist. "We need to surface," I said, reaching for the emergency ascent controls. "The pressure differential is getting dangerous." I triggered the ballast release. Nothing happened. I tried again, hitting the emergency ascent button that should have dumped our weights and shot us toward the surface. The controls didn't respond. "The ascent system isn't working," I announced, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Fern was frantically checking her instruments. "The electromagnetic interference is too strong. It's messing up all our electronic systems." Below us, the glowing patterns were getting brighter and more complex. What I'd first thought were random streaks of light were turning into something that looked almost like neural pathways, branching networks of blue-green fire spreading through the water. "Depth 14,000 meters, I read from the gauge, my voice cracking slightly. "This is impossible. We're deeper than the Challenger Deep." That's when I felt it. A current unlike anything I'd experienced before. Not water movement, but something else. Something that grabbed the Nereid and yanked us down with purposeful force. "We're caught in something," I said, fighting with the controls. "Some kind of current." "That's not a current," Fern whispered, staring at her energy readings. "That's intentional. Something's pulling us down." The submersible lurched suddenly, dropping another 1,000 meters in seconds. The pressure change slammed into us hard. Mildred gasped and doubled over, blood streaming from her nose. "Mildred!" I reached for her, but she was convulsing in her seat, her face turning purple as blood vessels burst in her eyes. "The pressure!" she choked out, blood frothing from her mouth. "Something's wrong with the pressure." Fern was screaming now, her body twisting as the forces outside the hull somehow reached inside. I watched in horror as her fingers bent backward at unnatural angles, the bones snapping audibly. "Emergency ascent," I shouted into the comm system. "Petrov Control, we need immediate emergency ascent." Static answered me. We were too deep, too far from anything human. The depth gauge showed 15,000 meters now, numbers that shouldn't exist. Through the viewports, the glowing patterns were so bright they hurt to look at, creating complex shapes that seemed to move and change when I wasn't staring straight at them. Mildred dropped completely, her body going slack as blood poured from her ears and mouth. Fern's screaming stopped suddenly, as something inside her chest gave way with a wet, tearing sound. I was alone now, watching my crewmates die while something in the depths pulled us deeper into water that defied every law of physics I understood. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another glowing pattern, a massive circle of blue-green light rising from below us. But as it got closer, I realized what I was looking at. An eye. 50 meters across, maybe more. An eye the size of a city block, with an iris that swirled with colors that had no names. And behind that eye was an intelligence so vast and alien that my mind pulled back from trying to understand it. The eye was looking at me. Not at the submersible. Not at the general area where we were falling. At me specifically, with a focus so intense I could feel it pressing against my thoughts. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare back into that massive gaze while my mind tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a creature. This was something that had been waiting here in the deepest parts of the ocean. Something that had been watching the surface world for longer than human civilization had existed. The eye blinked. The movement sent shockwaves through the water that shook the Nereid's hull. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear metal beginning to crack under pressures that shouldn't be real. But I couldn't look away from the eye. There was something behind it. Some intelligence that was studying me with the same detached curiosity a scientist might show when examining a particularly interesting specimen. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching. And it was deciding what to do with me. My vision started to blur as my brain began shutting down, unable to process the sheer madness of what I was experiencing. The last thing I saw before consciousness went dark was the eye moving closer, the pupil growing wide as something vast and old focused its complete attention on the tiny metal sphere that had dared to enter its realm. The hull was cracking now, hairline fractures spreading across the viewports as we were pulled deeper into the darkness. But somehow I knew the creature wasn't trying to destroy us. It was bringing us closer for a reason. As darkness closed in around the edges of my vision, I had one final terrifying thought. We hadn't discovered something unknown in the depths of the ocean. We'd found something that had been waiting for us. I woke up to the taste of salt water and blood in my mouth, fluorescent lights burning my eyes like I'd been staring at the sun. The medical bay's ceiling came into focus slowly, white tiles that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. 6 hours. That's what the clock on the wall read. 6 hours since we dropped into that void, since I'd watched Mildred and Fern die right in front of me. since that massive eye had looked straight into my soul. I should be dead. At 15,000 meters, the pressure should have crushed me flat. But here I was, breathing, thinking, remembering every awful detail of what we'd found down there. "You're awake." I turned my head and there was Jay, standing beside my bed like he'd been waiting for me to notice him. He was wearing that perfect charcoal suit, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine instead of participating in a deep-sea rescue operation. "How?" My voice came out as a croak. "How am I alive? I retrieved you personally." His pale eyes reflected the overhead lights like mirrors. The depths can be accommodating when properly approached. I tried to sit up, but my body felt wrong, like all my bones had been taken apart and put back together by someone working from a manual. "Mildred and Fern, where are they?" "They served their purpose." The casual way he said it made my stomach drop. "Their purpose? They're dead, you bastard. They died screaming." Jay tilted his head slightly, studying me with that same cold curiosity I'd seen in the creature's eye. "Death is a human concept. What happened to them was different." "What the hell does that mean?" Instead of answering, Jay moved closer to the bed. As he did, I noticed the temperature in the room dropping. My breath started coming out in small puffs, and the metal surfaces around us began developing a thin layer of frost. "You witnessed something that humanity is not prepared to understand," he said, his voice carrying that same formal precision. "Certain discoveries must remain hidden." Hidden from who? The public? Scientists? People who might actually be able to make sense of what's down there? Jay's appearance was changing as I watched. His already pale skin was becoming almost translucent, with a faint glow that seemed to come from within. His eyes were catching more light now, taking on an inhuman intensity that made it hard to look directly at him. "Hidden from a species that would destroy itself, trying to comprehend forces beyond its evolution," he said. "What you saw in the depths has been waiting far longer than your civilization has existed. It watches, it learns, but it does not wish to be disturbed by creatures who measure existence in decades rather than millennia." I felt something cold crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "You're not human. I serve as an intermediary, a translator between incompatible forms of existence. And what happens if I decide to tell people what I saw down there?" Jay's smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen, because it was completely empty of any feeling I could recognize. "Speaking about what you witnessed would result in consequences far worse than death. Your species has concepts for ending existence. What would happen to you transcends those concepts entirely." Heavy footsteps in the corridor announced Captain Campbell's arrival. He appeared in the doorway, his weathered face looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 6 hours. His steel-gray eyes wouldn't meet mine directly. "Dr. Jenkins," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm glad to see you're recovering." "Recovering from what, exactly?" I sat up despite the protests from my reassembled bones. "What's the official story going to be?" Campbell's jaw tightened. "Complete hull failure at 6,000 meters. All 3 scientists died instantly. The sub was totally destroyed. Nothing left to recover." "All 3 personnel." I looked between Campbell and Jay. "But I'm sitting right here." "No," Campbell said quietly. "According to our records, Dr. Anthony Jenkins died with his colleagues when the Nereid imploded. The man in this bed is a survivor of an unrelated diving accident who will be transferred to a private medical facility for treatment." The conspiracy was bigger than I'd imagined. They weren't just covering up what we'd found. They were wiping me off the map completely. "The Ministry of Natural Resources will handle all documentation," Campbell continued. Your transportation, medical care, and eventual return to the United States will be arranged through unofficial channels. I stared at him. You're making me disappear. We're ensuring your survival, Jay said, which is more consideration than most receive after such encounters. As he spoke, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The medical bay had several metal surfaces, cabinet doors, instrument panels, the IV stand beside my bed. Jay's reflection should have been visible in all of them. It wasn't. He didn't show up anywhere in the room, like he was made of something that light couldn't touch. When I looked straight at him, he was solid and real. But the metal surfaces showed only empty space where he stood. What are you? I whispered. I am what becomes necessary when two incompatible realities must coexist without destroying each other. Jay's luminescent skin was becoming more pronounced now, giving off a faint blue-white glow that reminded me horribly of the bioluminescence we'd seen in the depths. Your survival comes with permanent obligations, Dr. Jenkins. Silence, compliance, acceptance that some knowledge is too dangerous for your species to possess. Campbell was backing toward the doorway, obviously wanting to be anywhere else. Even he was scared of Jay, I realized. Whatever Jay was, even the people working with him didn't completely understand or trust him. The Petrov will return to port tomorrow, Campbell said. You'll be transferred to medical care in Vladivostok, then flown home once you're stable. Your apartment, your job, your life, everything will be waiting for you exactly as you left it. Except I'll know the truth about what's down there. And you'll keep that truth to yourself, Jay said, his inhuman eyes boring into mine. Because the alternative is to join your colleagues in a state of existence that your language has no words to describe. I wanted to argue, to tell them both to go to hell, to demand answers about the creature and what it wanted and how long they'd known about it. But something in Jay's look stopped me. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. And behind that promise was something huge and patient and completely alien. The crew members who passed by the medical bay doorway wouldn't look in my direction. They moved quickly, keeping their eyes down, like they were afraid that noticing me might draw unwanted attention to themselves. As the Petrov's engines buzzed beneath us, carrying us back toward the surface world, I understood that I'd become part of something far beyond human government secrecy. This wasn't just about covering up a discovery. This was about keeping a balance between humanity and forces that could wipe us out without effort. Jay stood beside my bed for another moment, his form casting no reflection yet giving off cold, and that faint, awful glow. Then he spoke one final time. Welcome to the truth, Dr. Jenkins. Try not to let it destroy you. The Russian doctors had no clue how I'd made it through. Remarkable, Dr. Volkov muttered in accented English, studying my chest x-rays for the third time that week. No signs of decompression sickness, no nitrogen bubbles in bloodstream, no tissue damage from pressure differential. I lay on the examination table in the private medical facility, watching him puzzle over test results that made no sense given what he knew about deep-sea physiology. According to his instruments, I was a perfectly healthy man who'd never been deeper than a swimming pool. But you say you were at 15,000 meters? He adjusted his glasses, peering at me like I was some kind of medical anomaly. This is not possible. Human body cannot survive such pressure. That's what I keep telling myself. The facility was nice enough. Private rooms, decent food, staff who spoke English when they remembered to. But something felt wrong about the whole place. Too quiet, too clean. And the other patients I saw in the hallways all wore the same empty expression, like they'd witnessed things they shouldn't have. My room looked out onto a courtyard where snow was starting to fall, even though it was only October. I'd been here 2 weeks now, going through test after test that all came back normal. Blood work, brain scans, lung function, bone density. Everything showed a man in perfect health who definitely hadn't been crushed by crushing ocean pressures 3 weeks ago. The men in suits showed up on my second day. Mr. Jenkins. The first one had silver hair and spoke English like he'd learned it at Harvard. We trust. Your recovery is proceeding well. Depends on what I'm recovering from. The second man was younger, with a face so ordinary you'd struggle to recall it an hour later. We represent certain international interests concerned with your welfare. Government interests? Private interests, Silverhair corrected. Organizations that facilitate cooperation between nations when official channels prove inadequate. They sat in the plastic chairs beside my bed, both wearing matching dark suits that probably cost more than I made in a year. Neither one had bothered to give me his name. Your medical treatment here is being provided as a courtesy, Bland Face continued. International cooperation in cases where citizens find themselves in unusual circumstances abroad. Unusual circumstances? I almost laughed. Is that what we're calling it? Silverhair's expression stayed the same. We know you've been confused about what happened recently. When someone goes through trauma, it can mess with their memory in ways you wouldn't expect. My memory's fine. I remember everything. Memory is subjective, Blandface said. What matters is ensuring your safe return home and continued well-being. They came back twice more that week, always saying the same thing but switching up the words. I was lucky, they said. Some important people had my back. It'd be real nice if I kept quiet about my medical treatment. I never caught them talking to the doctors or nurses, but somehow everyone got the memo on what to tell me. Diving accident, injuries from the pressure, amazing recovery, nothing permanent. The cover story was building itself around me, whether I helped or not. Jay came on my last night. I woke up at 3 in the morning to find the room 20 degrees colder than it should be. My breath came out in small puffs, and frost was forming on the inside of the windows. The electronic monitors beside my bed were flashing and beeping like crazy. He was standing by the window in that same perfect charcoal suit, staring out at the snow-covered courtyard, like he'd been there for hours. Your transportation has been arranged, he said without turning around. How did you get in here? The door was still closed, and I was on the 4th floor. Certain boundaries are more flexible than others. Jay turned to face me, and I saw that luminescent quality in his skin was more pronounced now, like he wasn't bothering to maintain the illusion of humanity as carefully. Your recovery has been satisfactory. According to the doctors, I was never injured in the first place. Medical science has limitations. What happened to you transcends those limitations. I sat up in bed, wrapping the blanket tight around my shoulders against the strange cold. Why am I alive? Why me and not Mildred and Fern? They serve their purpose. You serve a different purpose. Which is what? Jay stepped closer to the bed, and the monitoring equipment went completely crazy, alarms beeping and screens showing wild readings before shutting down entirely. You are proof that the arrangement works correctly, a demonstration that cooperation gives better outcomes than resistance. Cooperation with what? Forces that have maintained the balance between your species and older intelligences for longer than your civilization has existed. His pale eyes reflected the dim light from the hallway. Your survival comes with obligations, Dr. Jenkins. Permanent obligations. The temperature in the room was dropping so fast now that ice was forming on the water glass beside my bed. And if I decide those obligations aren't worth keeping? Jay's smile was the same empty expression I remembered from the Petrov's medical bay. Then you will discover that death is not the worst fate available to conscious beings. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out an envelope. Your travel documents. You leave tomorrow morning. I grabbed the envelope, and the paper felt ice cold against my skin. Inside were airline tickets, a passport, and what looked like medical discharge papers, all with my name but showing dates and details that made no sense. The flight records will show you traveled for medical treatment following a diving accident in U.S. waters, Jay continued. Your employment records have been adjusted accordingly. Your bank account will reflect compensation for your time and discretion. You're buying my silence. We are ensuring your continued existence. The compensation is incidental. I looked at the documents again. Everything was perfectly official, stamped and signed by authorities I'd never heard of. My entire experience on the Petrov was being erased, replaced with a story that made sense to people who lived in a world where unthinkable creatures didn't exist in the deepest parts of the ocean. What about the others? Campbell and his crew. They continue to serve their function. Something in the way he said it made my blood freeze. They're still alive? They exist in a state appropriate to their circumstances. Jay moved toward the window, and I realized he was getting ready to leave the same way he'd come in. Remember, Dr. Jenkins, keep quiet and you'll stay alive. Start asking questions about things you shouldn't know about, and you won't. Wait. I had to ask, even though I was terrified of the answer. That thing in the depths, what does it want? Jay stopped at the window, his form showing no reflection against the falling snow. It wants what it's always wanted, to be left alone while it watches your species develop. Your job is to make sure that wish gets respected. And if humanity isn't ready to respect it, then humanity will learn the consequences of disturbing something that has been patient for millennia but is not infinitely tolerant. The window opened silently, letting in a blast of Arctic air that shouldn't have been possible on the 4th floor of a building. Jay stepped toward the opening, and for a moment I could swear I saw something else. A shape that wasn't quite human, with too many angles and a glow that hurt to look at directly. Sleep well, Dr. Jenkins. Tomorrow you return to your life. Try to remember that some knowledge is too dangerous to share. He was gone, leaving only the open window and a room that slowly began warming back to normal temperature. The monitoring equipment flickered back to life, showing normal readings like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The flight home felt like a dream. Private jet. No other passengers. Crew who spoke to me with professional courtesy but avoided eye contact. My passport got stamped with entry dates that put me in the US during times I'd definitely been in Russian waters. When I got back to my apartment in Seattle, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for the mail that had been neatly stacked on my kitchen table and the bank statement showing a deposit of $50,000 from something called International Maritime Consulting Services. My employment records at the university showed I'd been on medical leave for a month following a diving accident off the Washington coast. My colleagues sent get-well cards. My department head called to check on my recovery and mentioned how glad they were that the experimental treatment in California had been successful. California. Not Russia. Not the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. I tried to get back to my normal life, teaching oceanography to undergraduates who thought the Mariana Trench was just a cool geographical feature, looking over research proposals for deep-sea exploration that would never get within 1,000 miles of what I'd seen, sitting through faculty meetings where the biggest argument was funding for new lab equipment. But every night, I had dreams of that huge eye staring right at me with intelligence older than human civilization. Every time I looked at the ocean, I wondered what else was down there, watching and waiting. And every time I thought about telling someone, anyone, about what I'd been through, I remembered Jay's empty smile and the way electronic equipment broke down around him. The years went by. I published papers on deep-sea pressure adaptation. I guided graduate students studying bioluminescence in extreme environments. I became an expert on the very depths I could never speak about honestly. And sometimes late at night when the fog rolled in from Puget Sound, I'd catch glimpses of a pale figure standing under the streetlights outside my building, never close enough to be certain, never there when I looked straight at it. But I knew Jay was keeping his promise to watch, making sure I kept mine to stay quiet. The whole thing was working exactly as planned. 7 years. 7 years of keeping my mouth shut, teaching classes about ocean depths I could never honestly share, and pretending that the worst thing lurking in the Mariana Trench was crushing pressure. Then I saw the news report. The Russian research vessel Petrov has been declared lost with all hands after disappearing during a routine geological survey mission in the North Pacific. Officials cite severe weather conditions that prevented rescue operations, though the vessel's last known position was over 3,000 nautical miles from the reported storm system. I was grading papers in my office when the story broke. My red pen stopped moving across a student's essay about bioluminescence, and I just stared at the screen. The reporter stood in front of some maritime authority building, talking about how tragic it was that all 117 crew members had been lost in what appeared to be a sudden storm. Except there hadn't been any storm. I checked 3 different weather services, pulled up satellite data, even called a meteorologist friend at NOAA. The waters where the Petrov supposedly went down had been completely calm for 2 weeks straight. They'd murdered everyone. Campbell, his crew, probably anyone who'd ever worked on that ship or knew about its real purpose. 117 people wiped out because they'd been part of something too dangerous to survive. Everyone except me. I sat in my office until the cleaning crew showed up at midnight, just staring at that news report and thinking about Campbell's weathered face, about the crew members who'd spoken Russian with Fern, about all those people who'd just been doing their jobs and had no idea what they were really part of. The guilt crushed me. 7 years I'd stayed quiet, telling myself I was protecting humanity from knowledge it couldn't handle. But really, I'd been protecting myself. $50,000 in my bank account and a comfortable life teaching safe, sanitized oceanography while people who knew the truth got disappeared, one by one. That night, I started writing. Not notes or research or academic papers. The truth. Everything that happened on the Petrov, everything I'd seen in those impossible depths, everything Jay had told me about ancient intelligences and arrangements between species. I wrote about Mildred's blood bubbling from her mouth and Fern's bones breaking under pressure that shouldn't have existed. I wrote about the eye that was 50 meters across and older than human civilization. I wrote for 3 days straight, barely stopping to eat or sleep. My laptop's battery kept dying even when plugged in, and the screen kept cutting out. But I didn't stop. People deserved to know what was down there. They deserved to understand that first contact had already happened, and their governments had decided to keep them in the dark about it. The strange stuff started on the 4th day. I woke up to find my apartment 20 degrees colder than it should be, even though the thermostat was set to 72. My breath came out in small puffs, and there was frost on the inside of my windows, despite the October heat outside. The coffee maker wouldn't work. The microwave display showed random symbols instead of numbers, and my phone kept calling people I hadn't talked to in years. But I kept writing. The next morning, my front door was hanging wide open. I knew I'd locked it, checked it twice before bed. The same routine I'd followed every night for 7 years. But there it was, swaying on its hinges like some kind of invitation, with dead leaves blown across my living room floor, even though the closest tree was half a block away. I put in new locks, deadbolts, chains, even one of those hotel security latches. Didn't help. Every few nights, I'd wake up to the door standing open and that weird cold air drifting through my place. The pale figure started appearing a week later. Just glimpses at first. A shape under the streetlight outside my building that wasn't quite right, too tall and too still to be human. When I looked directly, nothing was there. But from the corner of my eye, I could see him, watching, waiting. Jay was keeping his promise. The consequences were starting. My laptop kept crashing while I was writing the chapter about the creature's eye. 6 times it happened, and each time I thought I'd lost everything. But somehow the document was always still there when I restarted, like something wanted me to finish. The words kept flowing, even when my hands were trembling so badly I could barely type. I wrote about the conspiracy, about how deep it went, about the private interests and international cooperation that kept humanity in the dark about what shared their planet. I wrote about Campbell's fear and Fern's shaking hands, and Mildred's drive to document environmental crimes that turned out to be so much worse than illegal mining. The temperature in my apartment kept falling. Ice formed on my coffee mug while I was drinking from it. My neighbors started complaining about their heating bills, saying something was wrong with the building system. But I knew it was just me. Just what happened when you broke 7 years of silence. I didn't care anymore. Every time I thought about quitting, I remembered that news report. 117 people dead because they'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, because they'd worked for an organization that made deals with things humanity wasn't supposed to know about. Their families would never know the truth about what happened to them. They'd grieve for people lost in a storm that never existed. Someone had to tell the truth. Someone had to break the cycle of silence and cover-ups and convenient disappearances, even if it killed me. I finished the account at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. 43 pages of everything I remembered, everything I'd experienced, everything I'd been ordered to keep secret. I'd already set up accounts on a dozen different platforms, blogs, social media, file-sharing sites, even some conspiracy theory forums that would probably be the only places willing to publish something this crazy. My finger hung over the upload button. Once I hit it, there'd be no going back. The story would be out there, spreading faster than Jay or his people could stop it, and I'd probably be dead within hours. But at least people would know. At least someone would understand that the ocean held more than fish and coral reefs and rock formations. At least humanity would have a chance to prepare for whatever was coming next. I clicked upload. The files started transferring to 12 different sites at once. Progress bars crept across my screen while I watched, knowing that each percentage point sealed my fate a little more, but also knowing that each completed upload gave the truth another chance to survive, even if I wouldn't. The uploads finished at 3:16 a.m. I sat back in my chair, feeling oddly calm for the first time in 7 years. It was done. Whatever happened next, I'd finally done the right thing. That's when I heard my front door open, not the sound of locks being picked or wood splintering, just the quiet click of a door opening normally, like someone had used a key. But I was on the 3rd floor, and I'd put in 5 different locks just yesterday. The temperature in my apartment dropped fast. My laptop screen went black, and the only light came from the street lamps outside, coming through windows that were quickly frosting over. My breath came out in thick clouds as the heating system shut down with a mechanical groan. Footsteps in my hallway. Slow, careful, coming toward my office like whoever it was had nowhere else to be. I didn't turn around. I kept staring at my laptop screen, at the confirmation messages showing my story had been uploaded to sites across the internet. Whatever happened next, there was no stopping it now. "Hello, Dr. Jenkins." Jay's voice, exactly the same as it had been 7 years ago. Formal, precise, carrying easily despite its normal volume. I could feel the cold coming from behind me, could smell something like ozone and deep ocean water. "I kept my end of the bargain for 7 years, I said without turning around. "And now you have chosen to break yours.